Say my number one focus is building that vulnerability trust, and everybody talks about it. It's a very popular topic, right? But for me, I started doing it before it was even a thing. When I was at AT&T, I got to know my team. I became vulnerable, and I was told early on I was told not to do that. Don't get personal with your team. That is a recipe for disaster. I just don't know how to be any other way. So that's how I built my career. And fortunately, it hasn't bitten me too hard and it's worked really well. But that vulnerability trust, especially with my direct reports, has been key. I believe in my success. That's something I've been spending a lot of time on here at NCR Voyix as I've been building a team. But it really kind of gets back to starting with, do you have the right team and the right roles?
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Today we're going to talk about leadership principles from a creative perspective. Leading a creative team. We have CMO of NCR Voyix, Trish Nettleship. When I and Tricia and I first met, she was at AT&T. She was a marketing manager or marketing director. I'm not sure the exact title, but she had an incredible opportunity or responsibility of driving marketing campaigns and success for AT&T. Now she's moved to the publicly traded NCR, which recently split, and her division is the digital commerce with NCR Voyix. But Tricia and I talk about the principles that really are important inside her leadership. So leadership principles of success for a CMO, and you have a variety of different kinds of engineers that you work with and digital responsibilities. You also have creatives. And so it might be a little bit different when you think about creatives, but we bring this up to a level where it will help you in any way if you've got different types of people on your team, but you want to make sure that you are the best leader you can be and you can get the most out of them and you can develop them in that journey so that you can have A players. Tricia is an incredible resource, and hopefully you like the interview as much as I like it. My name is Gene Hammett. I'm an executive coach. We do leadership development. We do workshops. We do a number of different things to help companies revigorate their team, help them align together. If there's a big opportunity in front of you, then you want to make sure your team is at the best place. They are aligned together, and you address anything that's getting in the way of that. My set of tools and my experience has been working with teams and executive leaders specifically that are facing big growth opportunities in front of them. And we want to make sure that we're ready for that and we execute as best we can. And so if you are facing something similar, then I'd love to talk to you about what's going on. I'd love to give back to you some of the tools and some of the insights and help you create that plan so that you can go and execute it. Now, if you need our help, I'd happily help you, but I'll give you the plan. I'll give you some key insights and give you these tools that will accelerate your success. All you have to do is go to genehammett.com. The best thing you can do is actually email me, gene@genehammett.com. And if you do that, it's absolutely free. I promise not to sell you, and I promise to give you as much as I can, give you the tools to accelerate your success and increase your sense of alignment with your team. Just go email me, gene@genehammett.com. Now here's the interview with Tricia. Tricia, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. We're going to have a great conversation. I know it's been probably more than a decade since we've last talked.
I think at least, yes, it's been a long time.
You were at AT&T and you've had a few stops since then.
It's been a minute, yes.
So I know that you're the CMO at NCR Voyix. Can you give us a little background of the business and the role that you're in?
Yes. So I came to join NCR Voyix a little over a year ago. We were previously NCR, a company in technology mostly known for ATMs and the wraparound services. We split into two separate companies a little over a year ago, NCR Voyix and NCR Atleos. Atleos is more the ATM business and wraparound services, which NCR was traditionally known for. And NCR Voyix took the digital commerce side. So we're really focused on retail and restaurants, and we deliver technology that runs their business. So think point of sale solutions, services wrapped around that. That's what we do day in and day out, service our customers. And you probably have been in one of our stores during the holiday season, I would imagine, that we service.
I bet we do. Like the next 3 years is probably going to be interesting for you guys with AI and whatnot. I'm kind of curious, where do you see it going over the next 3 years?
Yeah, AI has been an interesting topic. You can't go anywhere without hearing about it, whether it's marketing focused or technology focused. Every trade show I go to, conference, there's a million sessions on AI. So that is a hot topic. The way I think about it for our business is it's an enabler. I'm not looking to and use AI to solve my challenges, just to solve my challenges, and looking at it from a technology perspective. I'm looking at what problem is it going to solve? How's it going to enable my team to be more successful? And from an internal perspective, how do we get more efficiencies and be more productive, as everybody's trying to get more out of less these days? But externally, it's how are we going to solve our customers' problems? We don't want a technology that doesn't have a problem to solve. We want to make sure it's something that our customers can actually use, and it's just not AI for AI's sake. So we spend a lot of time talking to our customers about their challenges, and then AI is just another enabler to solve that.
Well, we're going to have a great conversation today, Tricia, about leadership. And I know this is a broad topic. You've got a pretty big team, as we were discussing before we hit the record on. You've got creatives, you've got data scientists, and you have a lot of variety of people. What are the leadership principles that drive you to success?
I'll say my number one focus is building that vulnerability trust. And everybody talks about it. It's a very popular topic, right? But for me, I started doing it before it was even a thing. When I was at AT&T, I got to know my team. I became vulnerable. And I was told early on I was told not to do that. Don't get personal with your team. That is a recipe for disaster. I just don't know how to be any other way. So that's how I've built my career. And fortunately, it hasn't bitten me too hard and it's worked really well. But that vulnerability trust, especially with my direct reports, has been key. I believe in my success. That's something I've been spending a lot of time on here at NCR Voyix as I've been building a team. But it really kind of gets back to starting with, do you have the right team and the right roles? And that's not a really popular topic, right? Because the first step is, that means there might be people that may not fit the role or the company. And those are hard decisions you have to make as a leader, but they're really important.
Well, I want to go back to what you were talking about. People have said, don't get too personal. And I know that we can probably cross the line. I probably have to with my people. And I had one of my team members just the other day tell me something extremely personal. And she'd always been pretty guarded. I've been working with her for 2 years. But now I feel more connected to her than ever because she had the trust in me to tell me something that she was going through at a personal level. And we sat and cried together. I don't do that often. And I'm not asking, for you to, is there any moments like you, and I don't know that need to know the details or names, but like these real personal moments help you create that trust and bond between your employees. Is that the way you see it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think personally, it was back even before AT&T. I was in a role, and I was going through a divorce. It was early in my career. I was going through a divorce, and I was not sharing that with anyone. Right? It was not anything I was sharing. I went in, and finally, I had to share it with my boss. I had to be off work to take care of some personal things and related to the divorce. And I finally just went in her office, started bawling, and I'm not a believer in crying. I grew up in the old school, right? You don't cry at work. There's no crying at work. But I went in her office and I just lost it, right? And I had a moment of extreme vulnerability with her, and the connection that we made at that point. She's still one of my closest advocates and personal friends to this day. And this was a very long time ago. But that breakthrough in that relationship really taught me that that type of vulnerability with a leader and how that transformed your relationship and what it does in the work environment carries over to extremely positive work relationship that made me want to go above and beyond everything I did for her. And it wasn't about the job. It wasn't about the company. It was about that relationship with that leader. Very transformative for me in my career.
Now, let me break in here for a second. Tricia has been talking about vulnerability, and a lot of people have a problem with this word, but you can definitely take it too far. So I'll tell you that. You can, go into meetings and start crying right away, or you can, air your dirty laundry over and over and over, and it can be a drain on the team. But if you take the aspect of, I'm not going to share anything personal, I'm not going to try to connect with people personally, I'm not going to open myself up in that way, you won't have the level of trust and loyalty that you probably desire. And so you've got to find where your line is. I look at it from a place of transparency. I call it the transparency line. And a lot of incredible companies are very remarkable with their level of transparency. They're willing to trust their team members. They're willing to tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly, and so that the team will rally for them. Now, if you believe in that, then you want to make sure you question where the transparency line is within your team and really try to keep it as remarkable as possible. That means it's something that you don't see out there in the wild of other companies. It's unique, and that will give you a more high performance team and a higher level of trust. Back to Tricia. I'm glad you brought this up because I do believe that relationship is the core of leadership. You can't have one without the other. You can't ask people to have loyalty. You can't ask people to run through walls and solve problems and work the extra hours if you don't have a good relationship that's built on trust, and vulnerability is a pathway to do that. When you have risen the ranks of leadership. And were there other lessons that you learned around this about, similar to that, the vein of they told me not to get personal with my employees, but I don't know any other way?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons along the way. Let's be honest. We don't need to share all my dirty laundry. But there is, I think, that whole mentality where be willing to take risk and be willing to fail. People say that. Honestly, I don't believe most people when they say that until I see them fail and embrace that. So for me, that was a lesson I heard on and on again, but didn't fully embrace it till I learned most of my lessons the hard way. I have to go through it myself. You can tell me all day long that that's a great lesson for me, but until I experience it personally, I'm probably not going to learn it. For me, it was about failure. It was early in my career, and I fully embraced the new technology, probably more for technology's sake. I'm not a fan these days, technology for technology's sake, but I did at that point in my career. Oh, we need this technology. And it was a couple $100,000. I was not far along in my career, and I convinced my leaders to allow me to go do that. We executed this whole new technology, market automation in the early days, very early days. It was Eloqua. Great technology, by the way. It's not a negative. But we weren't ready, right? We were just not ready as an organization to go. We had this robust technology that we didn't have the people or the capability internally to leverage. So I spent several hundreds of thousands of dollars, couldn't actually execute or use the technology. So I had to go to my boss and say I failed. I was terrified. I really thought I was going to get fired on the spot. I didn't. But I will tell you, I learned a very hard lesson. But I embraced that failure because what I learned from that lesson and how I approach thinking about technology and how we make decisions very, very differently now than I did then. So, again, learning those lessons the hard way. But that was an example of taking that failure, embracing it, owning up to it, and then figure out how you evolve from there as an organization, as a leader.
I know you've taken a different path of your professional career, rising to the ranks of the corporate America and working with the likes of NCR and before that AT&T and the others. I became the entrepreneurial journey, and I know that I have learned so much from failure. It's even the story I shared with you about losing everything in my business. A lot of people start to feel sad for me, or they feel like I did go through a lot of pain to get there, but I'm very happy I went through that. Losing $3 million on a deal, closing the business, and having to rebuild myself created me into the person, the husband, the father that I am today. And you've probably been through the same thing in your journey. But my question behind all this is, how do you get an employee who's fairly new into their career and maybe they're midterm in their career to embrace this being willing to fail?
I think it first starts with role modeling the behavior. And it can't just be me, right? The CMO makes mistakes, so what? But seeing that across the organization, I think, so I have to role model the behavior. I have to enable my other leaders to role model the behavior. But then allowing the team members the space. We do a lot of university hires. We have a lot of young folks on my team, which I love. The energy is amazing. But giving them the space to make those decisions. So giving them projects that can be all theirs, but giving them the space to make those decisions and failing and coaching them throughout that process. But number one is showcasing every mistake that's made so it's not seen as a negative, it's seen as a learning experience. Obviously, you don't want to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. That's a different discussion. But I think it's role modeling and giving the team the space to allow them to make those decisions and fail and show them what good looks like afterwards.
So we're looking at lessons learned in your journey of leadership here. We talked about the power of vulnerability. We've talked about being willing to fail and really leading by example through those different times in your career. What else is pertinent to the way things are now? Because I know we have a younger generation coming in the workforce, and I'm sure there's some challenges there. What are the principles that guide you with that younger generation that you have?
Yeah, so you and I talked about it before we jumped on here, embracing conflict. I will be honest, I'm conflict averse. I don't enjoy conflict, but I haven't been able to get to this point in my career without having to deal with a lot of conflict throughout my career. So I'm a big fan of embracing it, even the uncomfortable, but you need to have those guardrails of what is okay and what's not okay. So my leadership team, we have a very, what I call vulnerability level of trust that we talked about that we build, and it takes time to get there. So we can have those really tough conversations, but not everybody has that level of relationship and trust. So showcasing what that looks like. Great example, I had a new leader come in, just joined our team, was in like week 2 or 3. We were having my leadership team and I was getting challenged from everywhere, right? And she pulled me aside after the meeting going, oh my God, that was so disrespectful. Do you allow that on your team? I'm like, what are you talking about? That was amazing. I hardly ever get that level of conflict and folks challenging me in my decision. I love it. I embrace it. So doing that, but showing that on a broader scale. So I have a very large team. We have town halls. I will sometimes allow folks to come up and share a different opinion and why we made a different decision what I started out with. So again, showcasing to the team that embracing conflict is okay, but giving in the guardrails. So how do we deal with conflict as a team in a productive and respectful way, but showing them what that looks like. It's one thing I can put slides up and say, here's how you deal with conflict, but showing them how we deal with it's the key.
Tricia talked about it's really hard to embrace conflict, especially when you're conflict avoidance, but you want to make sure that you do embrace conflict because things don't get better if you're not willing to then address them. I've asked a lot of people this. How many times does an issue just go away on its own? And it's very rare. And many people say it never goes away on its own. It gets worse. And so you want to make sure that you understand the cost of avoidance. I've worked with a lot of companies where we've actually zeroed in on what is the cost of not having these conversations. And we can actually get it into dollars and cents sometimes. Most of that is probably not calculable, meaning you can't put calculus to it or math to it, if you will. But do some exercises. What does it cost you by having a team that's not aligned together? And so you're not having the conversations. It's probably costing you, you're not going to hit your goals. It's not going to be as easy. And there's a real cost to it. And you want to ask yourself these questions about the cost of avoidance. And that way, when you are really honest with yourself and you're self-aware, you're able to have those tough conversations earlier and more often with your team and rebuild trust and create alignment and create the kind of relationship that allows you to really perform at the highest level possible. Back to Tricia. I wrote the book on tough conversations, and you haven't had a chance to read it yet. I'm going to send you a copy on me because I love to support our guest. Do you have words of advice for someone on your team member that has to have a tough conversation? You can't have it for them, but what would you say to the person on your team about that tough conversation to make sure it goes as well as it could go?
I mean, look, I have a lot of team members, first-time leaders throughout my career here and other places where they've had to have those really tough feedback sessions with their team that they've not had to deal with before. I do a lot of time with role modeling. So let's talk about what you want to share. Let's show how you do it in an empathetic way, right? And I grew up in the sandwich generation where, counseling was always sandwich it with a positive on the beginning and the end, and you put the negative in the middle. Well, guess what? They don't remember anything you said then. And there's enough research now that says you start with positive, end with positive. Nobody heard the middle part. So it's really giving them a chance to, what is it they really want to share? Getting down to the core. Don't give the fluff. Be very direct and specific, but allowing them to really role play with me how that plays out. So by the time they get to the point where they're having the conversation, they're more comfortable. You're not going to take that uncomfortableness completely away, but you give them an opportunity to role play that and get a little bit more comfortable. It's difficult, especially the first few times.
I have to reflect on this. You talked about being empathetic. We looked at tough conversation. We wanted to create a 3-step process. We couldn't get it down to 3 because tough conversations are tough. We couldn't do it in 5. We couldn't do it in 7. It ends up being 10, and it happens to be empathetic has 10 letters in it. So we end up creating a framework around that. Some of those are a little bit creative, but hopefully people will remember to go back to the model. And then you mentioned about the sandwiching, the shit sandwich is what most people call it.
I wasn't going to use those words, but yes.
And we agree. And we even say this, it doesn't work. The positive with the negative thing in the middle and then leave them with the positive. Some people only hear the good stuff. But the book will help you. I'm glad to send it to you, and hopefully anyone else listening in here, if you want to get better at tough conversations, or you want your team to get better, buy the book wherever you buy books online.
We can always get better at that. It's always an opportunity for improvement.
I'm glad you see it that way. When you write a book, you're really forced to think about the language you use, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. But tough conversations is a skill. It's not just you're good at it or not. It's something like tennis or golf. If you do it with some intention, if you follow a path, you can get better at it. So incredible that we're aligned, and you haven't even read the book yet.
Oh, I can't wait. Looking forward to it.
All right, Tricia, we're having an incredible conversation. I really wanted to get this out of you. I know that you have creatives on your team. Creatives think differently than a data scientist or a computer engineer, which you have all of these things. But how do you lead a creative maybe a little bit differently than leading other team members?
Yeah, if we share a little bit about that, I call myself the accidental CMO because I never wanted to lead creatives because they think very different than I do. And it was a challenge in my career working with creatives. was a difficult thing for me early in my career, back in my AT&T days when I had to work with them. So I purposely didn't want to manage them because I didn't think I'd be a very good manager for creatives because I think differently. What I've had to step back is it's not always about how I approach things. I have to, I love that question is how do you lead? Well, it depends, right? It depends on the person, but it is true, right? Creatives have to be managed very differently than a data scientist or a marketing ops leader or, your standard marketing manager. It's very different how they approach things. So I have to understand what drives and motivates them and where they're coming from, which is very different than someone who's very analytical. So I have a natural tendency to hate every creative thing I see the very first time I see it. And my team knows this about me. Like I have sometimes a visceral reaction. I warm up to it over time, but generally speaking, I don't like anything creative that is in front of me the first time. So I have to control how I respond because this is the creative's baby, right? This is something they put their heart and soul to and they creative. It's part of them. And so how I respond really matters. And so I have to really not respond in the reaction I'm feeling and think through what they need to hear from me at that time. So I give very specific feedback that's less about the emotional side because it isn't, I respond emotionally, but it's not about the emotions. It's about what we need this creative piece to do. So I point back here, I've got a personality thing on my back wall. All of my leaders, we do like maybe even do a different one every year, but understanding what my team needs from me, how they need to be communicated to, how I can engage them in a way that's helpful and meaningful for them is something I'm really passionate about. Creatives are no different in that sense.
I think this might be one area where we're different. I have that engineering background, but I look at creative and I think it all looks good because I can't create anything that looks good and like really connects with me. But when we do multiple versions and I'm able to choose between things, it actually helps. But I appreciate your perspective. Everyone's different. And I think I had to explain this to a lot of my clients. You can't just have one mode of communication because they're very direct. Some people don't respond to that directness. You have to find another, especially when you're talking in groups of 10 and 20 and 30, you've got to communicate in a way that connects with all of them, not just one slice of them.
Right. And I'm very direct. So I have to tone that down a little bit, in particular when I'm communicating with creatives who don't want to hear that directness right out of the gate.
All right. We're wrapping up our conversation today, Tricia. Is there anything else that you feel like we've left out in the conversation of leadership that drives the success of you and your company?
Yeah, I think, look, we talked about a lot of different things. For me, it's about that trust, being transparent with my team to the point where I probably cross a line on occasion because I think it's the right thing to do. And then finally, doing those really tough conversations in person whenever I can. I know in person's not a hot topic, right? Or it is a hot topic, not a popular topic right now. We are an in-person culture, which is counterintuitive to a lot of companies today. But for me, having those difficult conversations in person is a game changer because I can read you over Zoom, but it's not the same as sitting across the table from you and really seeing the full body language. So, as unpopular as it is, it's something that is part of our culture that we've chosen as a company that's important to us.
I agree with you. I'm very blunt in this. You can't have a tough conversation through text or email. A lot of people would love to hide behind that. We did put some guidelines if you have to do it through video, but in person is always going to be best. I wasn't intending to spend so much time on tough conversations, but it is a part of me. I know it's in my neon sign, so maybe it's in your subconscious of bringing that up. But Tricia, thank you for being here and sharing your principles that drive success of your career and your company's growth.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy.
Wow, another great interview. I really enjoyed looking at her perspective. She's got a huge team. She's got a huge responsibility. She works with a big company, but yet she leads with empathy. She leads with vulnerability. She tries to rebuild trust, and things are okay if we fail. If we're learning lessons from that, we're not repeating the same lessons over and over. It's okay if we are growing from those things. And hopefully those are really good signals for you and maybe even some hallmarks of things that need to shift inside of your own leadership as you continue to grow your company. When you think of growth and you think of leadership, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.